desire has placed it, right? So that's a quote that now she's saying this is what they're saying, right? What they are saying is that desire and interest are one and the same. We never desire against our interest. Now, if you've been following my videos closely, you know that that's false, right? You know that that's false, that we do desire against our interests. There's an actual technical term for that, and that term is akrasia, right? You know, we're getting a little nerdy now, but that term is akrasia. So the acratic individual, we automatically know. Whether you believe it or not is not really relevant. The fact is that there is a counterpoint to this original point. There's an antithetical thesis to this thesis, right? So the antithesis to this original thesis, which I would argue Spivak is defending, is, listen, you guys are wrong in saying that individuals are sort of tidied up and united because their desires and interests are one and the same. For example, Spivak doesn't say this. For example, I've already lectured on this. The acratic individual. The acratic individual has a schism between their interests and desires, hence the term akrasia. And I've done a lecture on this already, so I'm not going to get into what akrasia is, right? So with respect to a counterexample, look, traditional model. This model is flawed. Why? Because there is a sense in which an individual, the subject, can have a split, a schism in the relationship between desire and interest through the process of akrasia. Now, she doesn't talk about akrasia at all, but I'm just using that as an example to show that it can be sort of implemented, right? An undifferentiated desire is the agent. An undifferentiated desire is, right, the condition for the possibility of agency is undifferentiation, or unity between desire and interest is the condition for the possibility for agency, for subjectivity. And Spivak is not agreeing with that, right? And if she's, you know, I don't want to put words in her mouth, especially in Can the Subaltern Speak, I'll say that I don't believe that, right? I don't come from the school of philosophers that believe in an undifferentiated or a unified unity within desire and interest for the agent. I don't believe that, because I was trained as a Platonist in a sense, I guess, so there might be some remnants of Platonism, and there are obviously remnants of Platonism in this notion of akrasia, but such is the case, right? So, with respect to that, the traditional model, now we'll go back to the notes. So, the traditional model, subject is undivided, that is, desire and interest are united, and I gave you an example of that. Desire may be a facet of the unconscious, and thus the subject is said to arise from this ethereal, subjective culture, right? Like paranormal, parasubjective culture. Okay. There's another sense in which we can talk about subjectivity, right? There's another sense in which we can talk about subjectivity. And this is the Marxist, and these are my terms, right? What I'm labeling as so this versus the traditional model versus the Marxist model. Marxist subject. Again, Spivak doesn't use any of this, right? She doesn't say the word traditional model anywhere in the paper. She doesn't say Marxist subjectivity. To my knowledge, I have to go through and look, but she doesn't say Marxist subjectivity anywhere in the paper. None of this is necessarily within the paper directly. All of this that I'm presenting on is an assumption, are the assumptions that you have to bring this to the read, right? You should know this prior to even reading Can the Subaltern Speak. If you pick the Can the Subaltern Speak up, and you don't have an understanding of these sort of distinctions, these very, very, very intense distinctions in thought and theory, then you're going to misread, there's no question about it, you're going to misread Spivak, right? So, with respect to equivocating on subjectivity then, right, we recognize that there can be, and I'll put a list, equivocation list, right? EQU, if I can spell, EQUIVOCAT. Equivocation. I don't know if that's spelled right, but it doesn't really even matter. Okay, so the first equivocation could be the equivocation between oppression and subaltern. Right? You can equivocate between oppressed and subaltern. We don't want to do that, so we said all subaltern are oppressed, but not all oppressed are subaltern. Okay. Next thing that we can equivocate on is the notion of subjectivity. When you mean subject, when you mean agent, when you're talking about subjectivity, do you mean subjectivity in the French post-structuralist sense, or do you mean subjectivity in the sort of Marxist subjective sense? Not to say that this is either or. There are many other interpretations. I gave you a Cartesian dualistic interpretation. There's many, many other interpretations of subjectivity, but you know, do you mean it more in this sense or in this sense, right? And she's saying if you're using the term subjective to mean this, then I can't agree with you, right? I can't agree with your account of the subject if by subject you mean this. Again, philosophers were relentless. The one thing that we're all trained in, no matter where you get your philosophical education in, is words have meaning. Words have meaning. And what do you mean when you say subjective? By subjective, do you mean this undifferentiated, unified sort of desire and interest-based agent? I don't agree with that. Why don't I agree with that? For example, I would say there are acratic behaviors. Acratic behaviors serve as a counterexample. Now, if you want to respond to that counterexample to preserve the unification, then sure, let's have a discourse, but I immediately posit a counterexample by introducing the notion of acrasia. So, Marxist subjectivity, right? So, the subject is profoundly divided. This notion of agency, this notion of subjectivity in a Marxist sense, right? And I was thinking, you know, am I going to do a lecture on Marx, blah, blah, blah. And I might maybe sometime in the future, but I would have to be ridiculously rigorous in my analysis of Marx. And I feel like if I'm going to do any full-blown, I haven't finished my Kant lecture, I haven't finished my Fourier lecture. First, I'd have to finish up Fourier. Well, first, actually, I'd have to finish up Jose Ortega y Gasset. Then I'd have to finish up Fourier. Then I'd have to finish Kant. And then I would consider Marx. So if I ever do Marx, it'll be after I finish all those other scholars. So the subject is profoundly divided. And this division, the division within the subject, is the condition for the possibility, that's the phrase philosophers love, is the condition for the possibility of subjectivity. It's completely antithetical to this traditional model. The traditional model, the condition for the possibility of subjectivity is unity. In a Marxist model, the condition for the possibility for subjectivity, the thing that allows me to get to the antecedent for my consequence, subjectivity, is this division, this profound division, right? Even Du Bois would agree with this in his schizophrenia of the Negro sort of conception, right? So I definitely like the ring of this. So let me read a couple of parts because it's hard to, again, this is all background. It's hard to sort of understand initially what's being said. 69. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. So again, we're talking about Marxist subjectivity. My title. This is what Spivak says directly. Neither Deleuze nor Foucault seem aware that the intellectual within socialized capital, brandishing concrete experience, can help consolidate the international division of labor. These philosophers will not entertain, right? Neither Foucault nor Deleuze. These philosophers will not entertain the thought of constitutive contradiction. They will not entertain the idea of a constitutive contradiction. That is where they admittedly part company with the left. In the name of desire, they reintroduce the undivided subject. In the name of desire, sort of this Freudian attempt to account for desire, or maybe even some interpretations of Lacanian attempt to talk about the relationship between desire and subjectivity, right? In the name of desire, they reintroduce the undivided subject into the discourse of power, right? So when we're talking about power, especially what we began with, hegemonic power, right? They, Deleuze and Foucault, reintroduce this idea of the undivided subject. And she says this from the beginning. These philosophers will not entertain the thought of constitutive contradiction, right? So I want to entertain that, right? If you're not going to entertain that, I want to entertain the idea that we can talk about agency and subjectivity while still preserving this profound disturbance, this profound dislocation within the individual. And dislocation is actually a really good word.